know this review is like a month late, but I've obviously been looking for somewhere in my house to make this video. I've been recording like everywhere in my house right now. So finally, Guardians of the Galaxy is directed by James Gunn, written by Gunn and Nicole Perlman. It's based on the comics originally created by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. And this movie stars a huge cast of people, all of whom I think deserve mention. You've got Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, Lee Pace, Michael Rooker, Jaimon Hansu, Karen Gillan, John C. Reilly, Glenn Close, and Benicio del Toro. So Guardians of the Galaxy takes place way outside the currently established Marvel Cinematic Universe and begins with Peter Quill, or Star-Lord, stealing this mysterious orb. And when he tries to sell this orb, he runs into the assassin Gamora, who also wants the orb, and the two of them run into two bounty hunters, Rocket and Groot. And all of them pretty much get sent to prison where they meet Drax the Destroyer. And all of them kind of learn that this big bad guy, Ronan the Accuser, wants this mysterious orb for himself, so they have to make sure this orb falls into the right hands, all while being chased by Ronan's Kree forces, by the Nova Corps, and by the Ravagers, which is like this group of space pirates that Peter Quill betrayed. Now, from the very moment that Guardians of the Galaxy was announced, everyone's talking about how big of a risk it was for Marvel because, the tone was different, it was much more offbeat, these characters weren't as well known as Iron Man or Thor, Captain America, and stuff. But I actually don't think it was that big of a risk because the marketing has been great. Releasing the soundtrack, all the trailers have been great, and also just because that Marvel is this huge powerhouse already in the box office, and if they release anything, people will watch it. Of course, I still was a bit nervous because this is now the 10th film in the MCU, and Marvel really hasn't made a bad movie yet, in my opinion. But if this one ends up bad, like it just unravels everything, I think. And they already released Captain America: The Winter Soldier earlier this year, and that was like really well received. So how is this gonna top that? However, not only is Guardians of the Galaxy not a terrible movie, I think it's actually one of the best MCU movies so far. It's right up there with the first Iron Man and with the Avengers. Now, the great thing about Guardians of the Galaxy is the fact that it takes place like across all these different worlds. It's not tied down anymore to Earth or Asgard or anything. You get so many different worlds and stuff. It felt like an old Star Wars movie or like playing, Ratchet and Clank and stuff. Just the space imagery is just dazzling. We have so many sci-fi blockbuster things nowadays, and it's so great to finally have one again that really has this sense of wonder about it. Like just looking out into space is so great, and there's so many things to look at. And speaking of CGI, I actually forgot that Rocket and Groot would have, so many moving parts to them because I just kind of assumed they would be, they're part of the group. But, when you look at, let's say, Groot and you notice like how he's really made up of all these roots and branches and stuff, it's great. And when you really look at him move, all these parts are moving. And same for Rocket, where his fur, gets wet, his fur moves around and stuff. And it's just, they're really, really well realized characters. And the thing is, they would not have fit in any other franchise or anything. Like them in Guardians of the Galaxy, because everything is so weird and colorful and stuff, they fit perfectly into it. And finally, in the MCU, we finally get like these big awesome aerial battles. Like we got a bit of a taste of it from the Iron Man movies, we got a bit of it in Thor: The Dark World, but here we really do get ships fighting each other and stuff, and it looks fantastic. Anything that has to do with spaceships and stuff looks great. The Dark Aster, which is the ship of Ronan, the Milano, which is Peter Quill's ship, these all look just great. But despite all the CGI, you could also really tell that they built a lot of these sets. Like I really, really do appreciate that because that helps ground like the more fantastical elements of this. Like all these weird things are happening, but you can see that it's being all done on physical sets. And the costumes look great too. Like the Nova Corps have, this specific look to them. The Ravagers have this specific look. All their costumes just look, they really fit well with them. And I really love how there's such a heavy use of makeup in this movie. The characters of Gamora and Nebula and Yondu, like they all have face paint and stuff, and that's great because again, it reminds me of the old Star Wars movies. Interestingly enough, though, it doesn't feel outdated or campy and stuff because they dedicate themselves so much to creating these worlds, like people in makeup and stuff. It just feels like they fit there perfectly. And this is definitely like the most colorful Marvel movie ever. The color just pops in every frame. The cinematography is great because it just captures the feeling of all the worlds, all the different personalities. It's smoky in some worlds, it's much brighter and cleaner in the others. And the sound also complements the multiplicity of personalities in this movie. There's so much going on, but everything really does sound like it belongs in the same universe. Also, the soundtrack. Come on, let's talk about the soundtrack. Like every single song on this soundtrack, I think, is used so perfectly well. They fit each scene like in such a surprising way. And what's great is that these songs are actually relevant to the story, you know, like if not in like lyrics and stuff, like just the mood it sets. Like when I think about it, like there's no other song they could have used. Like it fits the tone of the story so well. And finally, this is a soundtrack that uses like 80s songs without sounding completely pretentious, because there are lots of movies, you know, teen movies, that use like so many songs from like the Smiths and stuff, and David Bowie, and I have nothing against those two. In fact, there's a David Bowie song in this movie, but you know, for once they use these songs in this movie and they don't feel like they're trying so hard to evoke certain, you know, feelings of nostalgia and whatnot. Like here it's really just used because it's fun. You know, they use popular songs from the 80s, happy songs from the 80s, and it's great. Now in terms of the writing, in terms of plot of this movie, like this is actually a very straightforward, like old school adventure plot, and I really, really appreciate that because it's not weighed down by any baggage. Like my problem with some of the Marvel movies in the past has been, you know, they've been trying to fit themselves into the, you know, MCU so much that they end up kind of derailing themselves a bit. But here it's just focused so much on just one thing. It's just, you know, they have to protect this orb, and that's so great. Also, again, just like the use of practical sets, the fact that they have such a straightforward plot allows, you know, it really grounds the quirky elements and allows those quirky elements to really shine. I feel like if this movie had like a really complicated plot and stuff, like all the characters kind of get lost in it, is really about the characters. And speaking of the characters, they're all so different from each other, but at the same time, it feels like they all fit into the same movie, you know? Like, it never feels like you're watching a different movie when it switches focus from character to character. And what's cool is that this movie really takes pains to show, you know, how different characters have different relationships with other characters, you know? Like, they all don't love each other, of course. Certain relationships are a bit rockier, and in terms of the writing, this is the first Marvel movie to really feel like a comedy, because every other Marvel movie has some humor in it, but it always feels like that. You know, it feels like it's an action movie or an adventure movie with a bit of humor. Here, this is infused with humor throughout the thing, and this movie is actually really, really funny. It's great that you take things seriously in this movie because they don't take themselves that seriously, and thus, you know, you kind of respect them more for that. But really, the stars of this movie really are, you know, the actors and the characters they play. I think at least the five main ones, they do great jobs here. Like first of all, we got Chris Pratt, and you know, I love Chris Pratt. I don't really watch him in TV, but you know, just hearing him in the Lego movie, I mean, he's great in that, and he's great here because what he does, he effortlessly becomes both an action hero and a comedian at the exact same time. You know, like Peter Quill, the character Peter Quill, he's so fun loving and stuff, but at the same time, you know, he can give that hero speech. He can really have show that emotional weight in him. Zoe Saldana as Gamora, in my opinion, is given the least to work with. However, you know, it's undeniable that her character is in a very interesting place. So she really does the best with that as she can, and she ends up being quite a strong character, in my opinion. Surprisingly, though, Dave Bautista as Drax the Destroyer was surprisingly like very menacing, but at the same time really funny. Like he has these really strange moments that are just really, really funny. It's really great casting, I think, to put, you know, Dave Bautista into this role because they know his strengths and weaknesses. You know, this is like his first big movie, and they know he can't do so much yet on the emotional spectrum. So putting him into this character, I think, really, really worked because he has the physicality. Vin Diesel as Groot, I think, exudes so much heart as Groot. Just through three words, you know, like how Vin Diesel was supposed to say these three words over and over again with different emotions attached, and I think he does such a fantastic job because, you know, you really feel for this character by the end. But of course, the guy who steals the show, in my opinion, is Bradley Cooper as Rocket. He is fantastic. His voice work is just immaculate because you don't know it's Bradley Cooper for the entire time. He does not sound like Bradley Cooper, and you know he has so much attitude. Like he really brings that attitude to the audience, but at the same time, there is lots of complexity back there. You know, there is a lot of emotional weight also. And everyone else in the cast is great. It'd take too long to mention them again, but you know, acting wise, this movie is really, really fantastic. And you really have to thank James Gunn for directing this. And what's surprising is that, you know, James Gunn's previous movies have been like these offbeat genre, you know, fusions of things. And you'd never think that James Gunn would be a good director of like this big sci-fi action blockbuster thing, but he does it really, really well. Like, you know, the fight scenes are good. Like they're not obviously they're not Winter Soldier intense, but you know, they are good. The space battles, of course, and like the aerial stuff, it's legitimately breathtaking. Again, it's great that James Gunn is able to bring this sense of wonder that was absent in so many other Marvel movies, but for the first time, you know, it really feels like, oh my god, this is like something new, this is something fresh. His strength in this movie really lies with his characters. You know, he really knows how to balance them well, and even the characters who really don't have as much personality and stuff, they still have moments where they shine when they're paired up with other characters. You know, like this movie has just fantastic chemistry all the way through. And of course, he strikes this excellent tone of it being really funny but really, really exciting at the same time. It doesn't feel like the humor is just tacked onto it. It feels like one thing, really. Now, as for the things I didn't like about this movie, for one, I still wanted more out of some characters. You know, they tease a lot of Gamora's backstory. However, we don't really get it that much. I kind of would have wanted to see that more. The villains, I don't find them as weak as other people find them, because for me, it's really, this movie is certainly about the Guardians themselves. But you know, uh, Ronan and Nebula, while I do think they're functional, I do think they're fine and entertaining. I still would have wanted to, you know, have a bit more motivation for them. And my other problem for the movie is that I feel like they get along too quickly. You know, like when they all finally meet each other, the Guardians, I mean, I feel like they should have not liked each other longer, but it just feels like they fall into this alliance. But those are ultimately like small problems, because Guardians of the Galaxy is like one of the funnest movies I've seen all year. It's a great, great movie. And I actually think this is kind of a good entry point into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because you know it's so, it doesn't try to force itself into the situation. You know, it does fit in with, you know, the other elements, and it has the same tone as the other Marvel movies, kind of. But if you're just new to the MCU thing, I think Guardians is a good place to start. Well, not really, but like it's a good standalone movie. That's what I'm trying to say. But because it's such a good standalone movie, I'm actually kind of worried about how this is gonna fit in with the other Avengers, because I really just can't imagine like Groot and Rocket standing next to like Iron Man. It's just strange to me, but we'll see how it works out. I'm actually fine with them just being, you know, a side story to the, you know, main Avengers plot. I'm fine with them just being there dealing with Thanos and all that. Alright, so that's my very, very belated review for Guardians of the Galaxy. Have you guys seen it yet? I hope you have. If you have, what did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.